The woman the gallows could not kill. The rope did not fray. It did not slip. It did not loosen. It snapped. One sharp crack echoed across the courthouse yard, loud enough to silence 300 people at once. The noose fell apart in clean strands, as if the fibers had been eaten away from the inside. The woman dropped hard onto the wooden platform, coughing, gasping, alive. Her neck was untouched. No bruises. No burns. No marks at all. For a moment no one moved. The executioner stared at the rope in his hands. He had inspected it that morning. Fresh hemp. Thick. New. Strong enough to hold a horse. The sheriff swallowed and wiped sweat from his face. The crowd leaned forward, confused, afraid to speak. They built another gallows within the hour. This time they used a rope so thick it looked obscene, coiled like a sleeping snake. They checked the beam. They tested the trap door. Everything was perfect. When they placed the noose around her neck again, she stood calmly, eyes forward, breathing slow and steady. Then the wood beneath her feet splintered. The platform collapsed before the lever could even be pulled. Boards cracked and fell away. The woman landed among the wreckage and stood up on her own. She brushed dust from her dress. She did not run. She did not scream. The sheriff's hands shook so badly he could not light his pipe. By sunset, no overseer in Talbot County would come within 10 feet of her. 6 days later, she was released from custody. No pardon. No explanation. The records simply state that she was freed and that the matter was closed. What the records do not explain is why 12 men who had built their wealth on cruelty suddenly could not bring themselves to touch one enslaved woman. They do not explain the whispers that spread through Eastern, or the nightmares that plagued the jailers, or why animals refused to enter the courthouse yard after dark. They do not explain what happened during the 6 days between her first failed execution and her sudden freedom. Her name was Dinah, and this is where her story truly begins. Before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to Liturgy of Fear. We tell the darkest true stories from American history, the ones that history books avoid. Comment below and tell us what state you are listening from. Now let us return to Talbot County, Maryland, in the spring of 1867. The heat came early that year. Not the gentle warmth of spring, but a heavy, wet heat that clung to skin and made breathing feel like work. The eastern shore lay between the Chesapeake Bay and the Choptank River, a land of water and soil and old habits that refused to die. The Civil War had ended 2 years earlier, but its shadow still stretched across the fields. Slavery had been outlawed, yet little had truly changed. The chains were gone, but the contracts replaced them. Formerly enslaved people worked the same land for the same men, paid just enough to keep them alive and just poor enough to keep them trapped. Eastern, the county seat, looked peaceful on the surface. Brick buildings lined the main street. A courthouse with white columns stood proud in the center square. There were banks and churches and taverns where men drank and spoke bitterly about a war they insisted they had not lost. Black workers moved quietly through the streets, eyes lowered, knowing that freedom depended on who was watching. 3 miles south of town sat the Hargrove estate. 800 acres of rich farmland stretched toward the trees. Tobacco fields rolled like green waves. Corn and wheat filled the low ground. At the center stood the main house, a grand Georgian colonial built before the nation itself had settled into place. White brick, black shutters, 6 tall columns, a widow's walk on the roof, once used to watch ships moving along the Chesapeake. Behind the house were the barns and smokehouses and the row of 12 cabins where workers lived. The same cabins that had stood there before emancipation. Same dirt floors. Same leaking roofs. Same feeling of permanence. Thomas Hargrove ruled this land. He was 63 years old in 1867, tall and heavy, with white hair and a face hardened by sun and whiskey. His family had owned the estate for generations. His grandfather had fought in the Revolution. His father had expanded the land through marriage and money. Thomas had inherited it all and guarded it with cruelty disguised as order. Before the war, he owned 60 enslaved people. After the war, he employed 42 laborers under contracts they barely understood and could not escape. Dinah was born on this land in January of 1831. No record lists her mother's name. The older workers remembered a woman called Ruth, sold south when Dinah was 5. Her father, Jacob, was sold to Georgia when she was 3. Dinah grew up with no family, raised by the cabins themselves. She worked as soon as she could walk, carrying water, pulling weeds, picking tobacco worms from leaves. By 12 she worked full days. By 15 she was moved into the house. That move usually meant disaster for young women. Dinah survived because of Hattie. Hattie was the head cook, a woman who had lived on the estate for 40 years. She taught Dinah how to cook, how to keep her head down, how to hear things without listening and see things without reacting. When Hattie died in 1851, Dinah became head cook. The position brought better food and a cabin of her own, but it also meant living close to the Hargrove family. Close to danger. Margaret Hargrove ruled the house with cold efficiency. Her son William was worse. Dinah was tall, nearly 6 feet, with strong hands and a stillness that unsettled people. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She never smiled. Her eyes seemed to look through people, not at them. Some said she could see your sins just by standing near you. The trouble began when William Hargrove came home from the war. He had left as a handsome young officer, full of pride. He returned broken, one arm gone, his body scarred, his mind darker than anyone understood. What William brought back to the Hargrove estate was not just bitterness. He brought something else, and Dinah was the first to notice. In the next part, we will uncover what William Hargrove became after the war and why his return marked the beginning of something far worse than death. This is only the beginning. Part 2. The death that was not meant to happen. William Hargrove came home from the war alive, but something else came back wearing his face. The man who returned to Talbot County in late 1865 was not the smiling officer who had ridden away 4 years earlier. That man had died somewhere between Antietam and the prison camp in Ohio. What stepped off the wagon at the Hargrove estate was hollow-eyed, shaking, and burning with a rage that never slept. William had lost his left arm to a cannonball. He had lost his health to disease and starvation. And whatever peace his mind once held had been torn apart by screaming nights and blood-soaked memories that refused to fade. He could not sleep without laudanum. He could not wake without whiskey. When sleep did come, it brought nightmares so violent that the servants could hear him screaming from the main house, calling out the names of dead men, begging for sounds that no one else could hear to stop. He needed pain around him to quiet the pain inside him. His father believed work would save him. In January of 1866, Thomas Hargrove made his son head overseer of the estate. It was meant to give William purpose. Instead, it gave him power. And William used that power like a weapon. He carried a thick leather strap on his belt and used it freely. Laws had changed on paper, but paper meant nothing on the Eastern Shore. William punished workers for crooked rows of tobacco, for tools left out overnight, for walking too slowly, for looking at him too long or not long enough. People learned to scatter when they saw him coming. Heads dropped. Feet moved faster. Silence became survival. Sheriff Porter received complaints from time to time. He always found them lacking. No witnesses worth trusting. No evidence worth pursuing. William Hargrove was a war hero in the eyes of the county, a man who had sacrificed for his cause. Black workers were not considered reliable narrators of their own suffering. Dinah stayed away from him. She worked in the kitchen behind the main house and kept her world small. She moved quietly. She spoke little. She understood danger the way other people understood weather. But on the morning of March 14, 1867, danger walked straight into her space. It was a Thursday. Dinah had risen before dawn, as she always did. Breakfast for the Hargrove family had to be ready by 7 sharp. No excuses. No delays. The kitchen was its own building, hot even in winter, unbearable in early spring. The iron stove dominated the room, its black surface radiating heat. Smoke stained the walls. The air smelled of grease and ash and damp wood. That morning the fire refused to cooperate. The wood was wet from rain. It smoked instead of burning. Dinah coaxed it patiently, feeding it slowly, losing precious minutes. By 6:30, she knew she was behind. The water for coffee had not yet boiled. That was when William came in. He was drunk, not enough to fall over, but enough that his steps were loose and his eyes glassy. He had been drinking all night in the overseer's cottage, chasing sleep that never came. He wanted coffee. He wanted it now. "Where is my coffee?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. "It is not ready yet, sir," Dinah said, keeping her eyes on the stove. "The fire was slow this morning. It will only be a few minutes. I do not want it in a few minutes. I want it now. The water has not boiled yet, sir. I cannot make coffee without boiling water." What happened next would later be argued in court, twisted and reshaped to fit a story that made white men comfortable. But the truth was simple. William reached for Dinah. He grabbed her arm, hard. Dinah pulled away without thinking. 36 years of survival taught her body what to do before her mind could catch up. William lunged again. His boot slid on the wet floor. Water from earlier washing had pooled near the stove. He fell forward. His head struck the corner of the iron stove with a sound that stopped every heart in the room. William collapsed. Blood spread beneath his head. His eyes stared without seeing. Dinah stood frozen. Sarah and Bess, house workers nearby, heard the sound and ran in. Thomas, the gardener, followed seconds later. They saw William on the floor and Dinah shaking. "He slipped," Dinah said. "He grabbed me and I pulled away. He slipped." Sarah and Bess would later swear to it. They had seen the whole thing through the window. William was drunk. He was angry. Dinah was trying to get away. It was an accident. But accidents do not matter when power demands a sacrifice. William was carried to his bedroom. Dr. Vickers arrived quickly. He examined the wound and shook his head. The skull fracture was severe. There was nothing to be done. William Hargrove died at 11 o'clock that morning. Thomas Hargrove stood over his son's body in silence. His only child. His legacy. Gone. Grief hardened into something sharp and deadly. Someone had to pay. Sheriff Porter arrived that afternoon. Dinah was arrested where she stood, scrubbing blood from the kitchen floor. She did not fight. She did not speak. She wiped her hands on her apron and let the shackles close around her wrists. The county jail was cold and old and rotten with despair. Built in 1820, it had not changed since. 6 cells. Barely enough room to breathe. Dinah was placed in the furthest cell. Pruitt, the jailer, brought her food that night. Cornbread and beans. He did not look at her. "Trial is Monday," he said. 4 days away. Dinah nodded. "You got anything you want to say?" "No, sir." She sat on the cot and waited. She knew how this ended. She had seen it before. The trial would be a performance. The verdict already chosen. Saturday brought Reverend Michaels. He prayed loudly. He prayed long. He asked God to forgive Dinah's sins and prepare her soul for death. "Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior?" he asked. "I have been a Christian my whole life," Dinah said. "You must confess your sin. I did not kill anyone. You need to repent." Dinah looked at him, and something in her eyes unsettled him deeply. Because she was not afraid. And fear was what he expected most. In the next part, we will uncover what happened inside that jail during the nights before Dinah's trial and why men who believed they knew death began to fear something far worse. Part 3 is where the true horror begins. Part 3. The gallows that refused to kill. The morning of April 2, 1867, arrived like any other spring day on Maryland's eastern shore. Sunlight poured across the courthouse square, warming the brick and the dust, turning the air golden and almost sweet. But for Dinah, nothing felt ordinary. Nothing could be ordinary when death was waiting. She walked between 2 deputies, her hands bound in rough rope. Her gray dress hung stiffly around her, stained and wrinkled from 2 weeks in a dark cell. She did not tremble. She did not cry. She did not whisper a single prayer for herself. Her head was high, her eyes scanning the faces in the crowd, the living and the watching. 300 people had gathered. Farmers and merchants, women in Sunday dresses, children sucking peppermint sticks, a few black workers in the back whose eyes flicked nervously. They had come for the spectacle, the final act of justice according to the law of Talbot County. Thomas Hargrove stood front and center, face pale with anticipation, his hands clenched. Cobb, the executioner from Richmond, inspected the gallows one last time. Trapdoor, rope, drop distance. Everything was calculated. Everything was precise. Nothing could go wrong. Dinah climbed the steps to the platform, each step slow, deliberate. She reached the center, the trapdoor beneath her feet. Cobb adjusted the noose behind her left ear. The rope was thick, strong, tested that very morning with a heavy sack of grain. Sheriff Porter read the sentence aloud. The words carried across the square like a cannon blast. Dinah, a Negro woman, having been found guilty of the murder of William Hargrove, is hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on her soul. A hush fell over the crowd. Children stopped fidgeting. The adults leaned forward, gripping hats and railings. Dinah's eyes swept across the witnesses. Her accusers, the curious, the pious Reverend Michaels clutching his Bible, and Thomas Hargrove, fuming with satisfaction. Before Cobb could slip the black hood over her head, Dinah spoke. Her voice rang out clear, calm, and strong, reaching even the back of the square. I didn't kill that man. He fell. But you don't care about truth. You never have. You just need someone to punish, someone to hurt, because that's all you know how to do. A murmur ran through the crowd. Thomas's face turned red. Proceed, he shouted. Cobb pulled the hood down, plunging Dinah into darkness. The rope pressed against her neck, rough and unyielding. Her toes felt the worn wood of the trapdoor. She took a deep breath. And then the rope snapped. Not frayed, not worn, not cut, just snapped, as if it had been rotten for decades, though Cobb had inspected it that very morning. Dinah dropped to the platform, her body twisting slightly to avoid falling into the trapdoor pit. She was alive, completely alive, her neck unmarked. A stunned silence fell. 300 people froze. Cobb stared at the broken hemp. The sheriff's jaw dropped. Thomas Hargrove's face went pale, rage curdling into fear. They built a second gallows immediately, hauling fresh oak beams and a thicker hemp rope, as thick as a man's wrist. Cobb tested the rope and the trapdoor. He measured the drop, triple-checked the calculations. It should have worked. It had to work. Dinah walked up the steps again, steady, her gray dress fluttering in the warm morning breeze. The hood was drawn over her head. The rope placed around her neck. Cobb released the lever. The platform splintered beneath her. Boards cracked and fell away. She landed lightly on the wreckage and stood. The trapdoor never opened. The crowd gasped, some screaming. Cobb, hands trembling, muttered curses under his breath. Sheriff Porter's knees buckled slightly as he reached for support. The executioner had hung 17 people without a single botched job. But this was different. Over the next hour, no overseer in Talbot County would approach Dinah. Every man who had built a fortune on cruelty, every one of them who had dreamed of punishing her, suddenly could not touch her. By sunset, the county's records would show only one fact: Dinah was released 6 days later. No pardon, no trial overturned, just freedom. What the records do not explain is why Thomas Hargrove's influence, Cobb's experience, and the sheriff's authority could not claim her life. They do not explain the whispers that began in the square that morning, how animals refused to enter the courtyard, how the wind seemed to carry faint voices repeating her name. Dinah returned to her cell after the first failed execution. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply sat, waiting, watching, thinking. Reverend Michaels came to visit, as he had before. He prayed. He begged. He warned. She listened quietly, her gaze steady, unsettling him the same way it had in his office. He left feeling judged, shaken, and afraid in ways he could not explain. Over the next days, the jail was filled with tension. Other prisoners kept their distance. Pruitt, the jailer, delivered meals silently, not daring to speak more than necessary. Even the men responsible for Dinah's capture, the same men who would have struck or killed another, avoided her cell. It was as if the air around her had changed, as if a presence followed her movements. By the end of those 6 days, something had shifted in Talbot County. Fear had replaced anger, wonder had replaced cruelty, and Dinah, the woman who had been marked for death, walked free. The question that haunted everyone who had watched, everyone who had built the gallows and calculated the drop, was simple: how had she survived what should have killed her? The answer would not be found in records or testimony. It would be found in the darkness that lingered long after the crowd had gone home. In the shadows of the Hargrove estate. In the stories whispered in fear. Dinah had changed Talbot County forever. And her story was only beginning. In Part 4, we will follow Dinah in those 6 days before her release, uncover the strange events that terrified the jailers, and reveal the first hints of the power she carried, something no man in the county had ever seen before. Part 4. 6 Days That Shook Talbot County. The jail was silent that night. Not the usual quiet of a locked building, not the kind that settled when the guards left. This was different, the kind of silence that made the air heavy and thick, that pressed against your skin and made your chest ache. Dinah sat on her cot, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outside, the moonlight filtered through the barred windows, casting long shadows across the mold-stained walls. It was April 2nd, the morning of her first failed execution. She had survived. The rope had snapped. The trapdoor had collapsed. Men who had built their lives on cruelty had suddenly refused to approach her. The same men who would have killed without hesitation now stared at her as if they feared she might reach out and touch their souls. That night, Dinah did not sleep. She did not need to. Her mind moved faster than any storm, thinking of the events that had brought her here, of the men who wanted her dead, and of the strange energy she had felt coursing through her the moment the rope broke. By sunrise, the jailer, Pruitt, had brought her food. He set a plate of cornbread and beans on the floor of her cell, eyes downcast, voice barely above a whisper. There was a tremor in his hands, something she noticed but did not comment on. It had been 30 years since Pruitt had worked in the jail. He had seen hundreds of prisoners come and go. He had never seen anything like her. Over the next 6 days, the events in that jail would become legend, whispered quietly by those who dared speak of them at all. On the second day, the wind shifted. A storm approached from the Chesapeake Bay, bringing dark clouds that seemed to thicken unnaturally over the jail. Windows rattled even though no one touched them. Shadows moved where no one stood. Pruitt swore he heard footsteps in the hall, though the corridor was empty. Other prisoners complained of sudden chills, of strange noises that made them cover their ears and pray. Dinah remained seated, calm, observing. She had learned long ago to watch and wait, to notice details that others missed. She had learned to understand people, to see through them, to predict their fears before they spoke. Reverend Michaels visited on the 3rd day. He came with his Bible and his prayers, as he always did. But when he stepped into the cell, the air changed. It was not just cold, it was heavy, thick, as if the walls themselves were watching. Michaels felt his heart pound, his hands shake, and he almost dropped the Bible. He had been to many prisons, prayed over many condemned souls, but never had he felt the weight pressing down like this. Dinah listened politely while he prayed, but she did not respond. She let the words pass over her, untouched. When he finished, he looked at her, expecting some sign of remorse or fear. There was none. Michaels shivered and left, muttering prayers under his breath. On the 4th day, the strangest event occurred. Pruitt brought her breakfast, as usual, but when he opened the cell, he found that the food on the floor was untouched, yet the dishes had been moved slightly to the side. He insisted no one else had entered. The locks were intact. The keys hung in his pocket. The air felt charged, electric, and Pruitt refused to enter the cell again without another deputy. That same day, Thomas Hargrove arrived in Easton. He sent a letter demanding she be moved to another jail, one further from the courthouse, one under tighter control. Sheriff Porter hesitated. There were no orders from the governor. The law required her to remain in Talbot County. But even he, a man hardened by decades of enforcing justice, hesitated when he stepped into her cell. The air felt different. He felt his knees weaken, a cold sweat breaking out along his spine. He left quickly, mumbling excuses about paperwork. On the 5th day, the other prisoners became openly terrified. A man accused of drunkenness screamed through the night that he could hear Dinah whispering in voices that were not human. The next morning, Pruitt found the man exhausted, pale, and rambling incoherently about shadows and eyes. Sheriff Porter released him immediately. Meanwhile, Dinah remained calm. She did not speak to anyone beyond the barest necessities. She did not make noise. She did not cry, but she observed everything, learning, cataloging, preparing. Strange things began to happen in the town outside the jail as well. Animals refused to pass the gates. Horses would rear, dogs would bark at invisible threats. Even the wind seemed to shift away from her cell. People whispered about curses and witchcraft, about a woman who had survived the gallows. By the 6th day, no overseer, no lawman, no man of standing in Talbot County would approach the jail willingly. And yet, Dinah remained untouched. She did not act. She did not demand. She did not threaten. The events themselves seemed to obey some unspoken law, bending around her, shielding her from harm. On the evening before her scheduled release, the night was unnaturally still. Reverend Michaels came once more, clutching his Bible tightly. He begged her again to confess, to accept salvation, to acknowledge sin. Dinah's voice was quiet but steady. "I have done nothing wrong." He fell. Michaels recoiled. He felt an icy weight in his chest, a chill that was not from the spring air. He looked at her and for the first time wondered if she saw not just through people, but into them. Into their very hearts. That night, the jailer did not sleep. Pruitt kept thinking he heard a whisper, a sound too soft to recognize, coming from Dinah's cell. When he checked, she was sitting silently, eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron, though nothing was burning. He left, unnerved. By sunrise on the 6th day, Dinah was free. The jailers could not explain it. The law offered no reason. Thomas Hargrove's influence, his fury, his wealth, could not compel anyone to take her life. The rope, the trapdoor, the judges, the deputies, they all seemed to falter in her presence. The townspeople whispered that she had been touched by something not of this world. Some called it divine, some called it witchcraft, others simply said she had been protected by a power no man could name. Dinah walked out of the Talbot County jail quietly, head held high, eyes calm. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply walked free, carrying with her a presence that would haunt the county for years. No one ever saw her fear. No one ever saw her break. And for those who tried to harm her, whether with law or rope, their hands failed them, their courage faltered, and their judgment wavered. Dinah had survived the 6 days that were meant to kill her. She had endured forces both human and something else entirely. And Talbot County would never forget. In Part 5, we will explore how Dinah moved after her release, the strange events that followed her through the county, and the first whispers of a power so deep and terrifying that even men like Thomas Hargrove could not ignore it. Part 5. The shadow that followed her. When Dinah stepped out of the Talbot County jail, the sun was high and hot, burning the dust in the streets. The crowd had thinned, but the whispers remained. People said her eyes had changed. Others swore the air around her shimmered, like heat waves or some strange energy they could not name. She walked calmly, slowly, as if she owned the county, even though every man and woman she passed had once wanted her dead. Her gray dress, now faded and worn, brushed the ground. She did not look at anyone. She did not speak. And yet, people felt her presence pressing against them, heavy and undeniable. For the first few hours, she returned to the edge of the Hargrove estate. The fields stretched out like waves of green and gold, the same tobacco, wheat, and corn she had worked since childhood. She did not go to the house. She did not speak to Thomas or Margaret Hargrove. She stayed at the tree line, watching, waiting, sensing. And then strange things began to happen. The animals on the estate reacted first. Horses refused to leave their stalls. Dogs barked at corners where no one stood. Chickens scattered as if something invisible moved among them. The air carried a faint scent of iron and smoke, something unnatural, something alive. The overseers who had once cracked whips with ease began to stumble, trip over nothing, and fall as if the land itself conspired against them. Word spread quickly. By mid-afternoon, the story of Dinah's survival had reached every corner of Talbot County. Men whispered in taverns and stores, wondering if she had been touched by God or cursed by something else entirely. Children ran home from school, telling their parents that they had seen her standing alone, yet commanding the air around her. Thomas Hargrove, furious and fearful, tried to regain control. He sent deputies to follow her, to harass her, to intimidate her into leaving. Each attempt failed. The deputies swore that when they drew near, their hands would tremble uncontrollably. Horses bolted. Doors slammed by themselves. They returned to Hargrove empty-handed and pale, muttering about things they could not explain. Dinah did not act. She did not fight. She did not curse. She moved silently, her presence alone shaping the events around her. By nightfall, her path through the county had become a legend in whispers, a shadow moving just ahead of fear and awe. That night, she slept in the small cabin she had inherited from Hattie, the woman who had taught her to cook. The cabin smelled of tobacco smoke and the faint sweetness of herbs. The walls were rough, the floor uneven, but it was home, and it was safe. But even there, Dinah was not alone. Outside, the wind carried voices, faint and urgent. Shadows shifted in corners that should have held nothing. She listened, unmoved, understanding what others feared but embracing it without flinching. Something had followed her out of the jail. Something that had waited for 6 days while men trembled, while ropes broke, while wood splintered. And it was still with her. The next morning, Dinah returned to the town. She walked past merchants and farmers, past children who stared openly. Yet no one dared approach her. Thomas Hargrove followed at a distance, furious and powerless. Cobb, the executioner, left town entirely, muttering about forces he could not understand, forces that had turned him from a master of death into a trembling witness. Dinah did not speak to anyone in town that day. She moved through streets and alleys, quiet and deliberate, as if testing the boundaries of what she could do, what she could bend. Windows rattled as she passed. Horses shied away. People crossed the street to avoid her, even when she did nothing at all. By the third day after her release, the whispers had grown louder. They said she had survived death itself. They said she had broken ropes and shattered wood with nothing but her presence. They said men who had come near her fell ill, lost sleep, or dreamed of things that were not human. Dinah visited the outskirts of the estate once more. The land she had known all her life was the same, yet it felt different under her eyes. Every tree, every field, every shadow seemed to respond to her. She touched nothing, spoke nothing, and yet, the very air moved with her. She had changed, and the land had changed with her. In town, Reverend Michaels could not rest. He stayed up nights praying and reading scripture, but the prayers felt hollow. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Not her face, exactly, but the weight of her presence, heavy, silent, and inevitable. He wondered if she was still human or something more, something ancient and unyielding. By the 5th day, even Thomas Hargrove was in despair. His wealth, his influence, his authority, all had failed him. He could not punish her. He could not intimidate her. And he feared what she might do next. He spoke to no one, barely ate, and spent his hours pacing the halls of the main house, muttering curses that were swallowed by the thick walls. On the 6th day, Dinah walked past the courthouse square. The gallows had been dismantled, but the shadow of that place lingered. Children dared not play near it. Men whispered that the boards had never been repaired because no man wanted to touch the cursed site. Dinah moved silently past it, the air shifting subtly in her wake. By the end of that 6th day, Dinah was gone from the town, her path untraceable. People swore they saw glimpses of her in the fields at dusk, or near the river, or in shadows that could not be explained. Animals remained uneasy. The wind seemed to carry warnings. Talbot County had been altered, changed, reshaped by her survival. No one could say how. No one could explain why. And no one dared question it openly. Dinah had survived the gallows. She had walked free through the fear of men. She had returned to the land she had always known and found it trembling beneath her feet. And yet, she did not celebrate. She did not boast. She simply moved, watched, and waited. By the time the sun set on that 6th day, the county had changed. Men who had believed themselves untouchable now feared her presence. Women whispered about her in kitchens. Children told stories that could not be true but felt real. Even the wind seemed to carry her name, softly, over the fields and the river and the marshes. Dinah was no longer just a woman. She was a force, a shadow, a presence that could not be denied. In Part 6, we will follow Dinah as she begins to assert control over what comes next, showing that survival is not enough, that sometimes, to live, you must claim the power that has been given to you by fear itself. Part 6. The power she wielded. No one in Talbot County slept well after Dinah walked free. Even those who had stayed home, hidden behind shutters and curtains, felt her presence. Some said the air trembled when she passed. Others swore shadows moved toward her as if drawn by an invisible force. Dinah did not seek attention. She did not boast. She simply moved through the county with a calm, deliberate certainty. Yet every step she took shifted the world around her. Men who had once struck her now avoided her gaze. Horses refused to pull carts when she was near. Doors swung open or slammed shut without wind. The laws, the social rules, the very balance of Talbot County seemed to bend around her. She returned to the Hargrove estate first, walking the familiar paths through the fields that had once been her prison. The earth felt alive beneath her feet. She touched nothing, yet the crops seemed to straighten, the soil seemed to soften. Even the tobacco, stubborn and rough, leaned slightly as if bowing. Thomas Hargrove watched from the porch of the main house, anger and fear warring on his face. His son was dead, his authority had failed, and now, the woman he had sought to hang freely commanded the very land he had inherited for generations. He could not understand, he could only watch. Dinah's first act was quiet, almost imperceptible. She went to the cabins where the workers lived. The same cabins with leaky roofs, dirt floors, and shadows that had haunted generations of enslaved people. She did not knock. She did not call. She simply entered. The women and men inside froze, unsure whether to flee or fall to their knees. Her presence alone demanded attention. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a weight that made them listen. She told them to gather, to prepare. She gave no reason at first. She only asked that they trust her, that they follow her instructions without question. And, perhaps because they had seen her survive what should have killed her, they obeyed. Word of Dinah's strange command spread quickly. Neighbors, merchants, even strangers traveling through the county noted the odd certainty in the air, the way people moved differently when she passed. Children whispered that her eyes glowed in the dark. Farmers swore their tools and animals shifted on their own, as if acknowledging her will. By the third day after her release, Dinah had begun to shape her environment in ways subtle and terrifying. The Hargrove estate, once a symbol of authority and cruelty, had become a place of unease. Thomas Hargrove found that no matter how loudly he shouted or how fiercely he demanded obedience, things would not go as he wanted. Doors would lock themselves. Animals would refuse to eat. Staff would stumble, forget, or falter. Dinah did not act with malice. She did not destroy for pleasure. But every step she took, every glance she gave, made it clear that the old order had ended. Fear had shifted. Respect had shifted. The county had shifted. At night, she walked the boundaries of the estate, along the tree line where the marsh met the fields. The air was thick with fog, and the moonlight shone like silver on the water. Shadows moved around her as if alive. Dinah felt them, acknowledged them, and let them follow. By dawn, the entire county seemed to whisper her name, softly, like wind through reeds. Even the sheriff, Porter, who had long been accustomed to wielding law as a weapon, found himself unable to act. His hands trembled when he carried out paperwork regarding her release. His deputies whispered of strange noises in the jail at night, and even the hardened men who had trained their eyes to notice nothing beyond evidence and orders found themselves uneasy. The fifth day brought the first true confrontation. Thomas Hargrove tried to force the workers back into submission. He stood in the fields, shouting orders, demanding obedience. But the workers, emboldened by what they had seen in the past week, hesitated. They looked at Dinah, standing silently on the edge of the field, her presence enough to stop their fear. Thomas struck one of the laborers, a man named Samuel, and Samuel froze. His hands shook. Sweat poured down his face. Thomas struck again. Samuel dropped to the ground, not from pain, but from an unseen force pressing on him, crushing, undeniable. Thomas's rage turned to fear. The more he tried to control, the weaker he felt. The more he tried to assert authority, the more the land and the people resisted him. By the sixth day, it became clear to everyone that Dinah was no longer just a woman. She was a force, a shadow, a presence that defied law, defied violence, defied centuries of tradition. Men who had once ruled the county with whips and contracts now walked softly, whispered cautiously, and avoided her path. Even children, too young to understand fully, sensed it and gave her space. Dinah, however, never misused this power. She did not strike fear for fun. She did not command the wind or the soil for herself alone. She moved with purpose, guiding, protecting, and observing. Her eyes, dark and steady, took in everything. She understood fear and respect, cruelty and mercy. She wielded her presence as a shield and a warning. By the seventh day, rumors had spread beyond the county. Travelers told stories of a woman who had survived the gallows, who walked freely while men trembled, who could bend people and animals and land with a mere glance. Some said she was touched by God. Others whispered of darker forces. Children whispered her name in awe, adults spoke it with caution, and Thomas Hargrove, once a master, spoke it only in private, a warning and a curse. Dinah's story was becoming legend while it was still unfolding. Talbot County had never seen anything like it. No law, no wealth, no violence could contain her. The threads of the old order had frayed, and she had pulled them entirely apart. And she had only just begun. In Part 7, we will follow Dinah as she ventures beyond the estate, encountering those who would challenge her, learning the limits of her new power, and uncovering the dark history buried in Talbot County that may explain why she, of all people, had survived what should have been her death. Part 7. The Shadows of Talbot County. The wind carried a whisper that no one could name. People in Talbot County felt it before they saw her, a presence that moved through streets and fields alike, bending the air around her. Dinah had survived death once. Now, she was learning how to survive the fear and curiosity of a world that could not understand her. She left the Hargrove estate at dawn, stepping into the mist that lay over the fields. The marshes to the east glistened with dew, and the faint cries of birds cut through the quiet. Dinah's eyes were sharp, scanning the land with the same focus she had learned as a child picking tobacco and kindling. Every tree, every fence, every shadow spoke to her. She had survived the gallows. She would survive what came next. Her first stop was the town of Easton. The streets were quieter than usual. Windows remained shut, shutters nailed against the wind, though there was no storm. Merchants and townsfolk watched from behind curtains, whispering to one another, fearful of drawing her attention. Even the county sheriff hesitated at the courthouse steps, unsure how to enforce a law that seemed powerless against her. Dinah moved with a purpose that felt almost otherworldly. She went from street to street, observing, learning, cataloging. She did not speak to anyone unless they sought her out. Yet even her silence commanded attention. Horses shied away when she passed. Dogs barked at corners where no one stood. Windows rattled without wind. People swore they felt the temperature drop near her, as if the air itself feared her presence. By midday, Dinah arrived at the edge of a farm owned by a man named Whitaker, a wealthy tobacco planter with a reputation for cruelty. He had heard of her survival, of the 6 days that had shaken Talbot County, and he believed he could challenge her. Dinah approached his field, where laborers worked under his watchful eye. Whitaker stepped forward, brandishing a cane, demanding she turn back. Dinah did not move. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there, calm, her eyes steady and unflinching. And yet, Whitaker stumbled, his legs trembling, as if the land itself had betrayed him. He raised his cane again, but the wind shifted, and he found himself unable to lift it. The laborers froze, unsure if they were witnessing something supernatural or merely a trick of fear. The rumor of her power spread quickly that day. By evening, every planter in the county knew Dinah had returned to claim space in a world that had long sought to crush her. Men who had once ruled fields with whips and contracts now whispered of curses, of divine justice, of a woman untouched by death and unbound by fear. That night, Dinah camped at the edge of the river, the same chop tank that had carried whispers of her birth and survival. The water reflected the moonlight, and shadows stretched long and strange across the banks. Dinah listened to the water, to the rustle of reeds, to the far-off cry of animals. She could feel the pulse of the county, the heartbeat of the land, the tension of fear still lingering from the gallows. It was there she first sensed something more. Not human, not entirely of this world. A presence that mirrored her own, dark and waiting, observing her every move. It did not speak. It did not act. But she knew it was there. She understood that survival had brought her not just freedom, but attention from forces older than law, older than Hargrove, older than Talbot County itself. Over the next 2 days, Dinah tested her limits. She visited farms and small settlements, walking quietly among the people who once would have ignored her or threatened her. Each time she entered a space, the rules shifted. Tools fell from hands, animals balked, men and women froze. Nothing violent, but undeniable. The county began to change simply because she was present. Thomas Hargrove watched from his estate, helpless and angry. He had tried to manipulate the law, intimidate the workers, even threaten Dinah's life from a distance. All efforts had failed. Even his money and influence could not bend reality in her presence. Fear had become a force he could not control, and respect had become something he could no longer demand. The 5th day after leaving the estate, Dinah encountered a group of men plotting to capture her. They had tracked her movements and brought ropes, clubs, and iron chains. Dinah stood calmly as they approached, hands relaxed at her sides. They shouted threats, swung clubs, and lunged forward. But something in her presence unbalanced them. Legs buckled, arms shook. Panic rippled through the group, spreading faster than any instruction. They fled, not because she attacked, but because the air around her bent their will. Word of this spread quickly, from farm to farm, village to village. Dinah was no longer just a survivor. She had become something else, a force that bent the world to her presence, a shadow that could not be captured or restrained. Men whispered that she was touched by God. Others feared something darker, something ancient and unyielding. That night, Dinah returned to the riverbank. She looked across the water, sensing the land, the trees, the marshes, and the county itself. She had survived death, she had defied the law, and she had altered the fear and respect of every man and woman in Talbot County. But she knew her journey was not over. Forces older than the county itself were aware of her. Shadows that had watched from the edges of her life were now following openly. And Dinah understood that survival alone was not enough. She would need to master what she had become, or be consumed by it. By dawn on the 7th day, Dinah had vanished from sight, leaving behind whispers, awe, and a county forever changed. Men and women who had once ruled Talbot County felt powerless. Children repeated her name in reverent fear. The wind carried stories of the woman who had survived the gallows and walked freely while the world trembled. Talbot County had learned a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. Fear had shifted, power had shifted, and Dinah, the woman who had stared death in the face, had become a force that no man could reckon with. In Part 8, we will follow Dinah as she confronts those who still seek to control her, discovering the full reach of her influence, and the dark history of Talbot County that explains why she alone could survive what should have killed her. Part 8. The reckoning begins. Dinah had survived the gallows. She had walked free while the people of Talbot County trembled. But survival alone was no longer enough. The whispers, the fear, and the strange events that followed her were only the beginning. There were still men who believed they could control her, still people who wanted to punish what they could not understand. She returned to the edge of the Hargrove estate, not to plead for mercy or revenge, but to assert what she had become. The fields stretched out under the hot spring sun, the tobacco and wheat swaying as if alive. Dinah felt the land responding to her, acknowledging her presence, bending to her will. The estate was hers now, not by inheritance or law, but by survival, by power, by the truth that no man could kill what refused to die. Thomas Hargrove watched her from the porch, fury burning in his chest. He had tried everything: threats, intimidation, bribes, legal maneuvers. Nothing had worked. She had returned from death untouched and unafraid. His son was dead. His authority had crumbled. Now, she walked through the land like a shadow no one could touch. That morning, Dinah visited the cabins where the workers lived. Faces pale with awe and fear peered from windows and doorways. She spoke quietly, her voice calm but commanding. She told them they would be safe as long as they trusted her, that she would watch over them, that the land itself would bend to their protection under her guidance. They listened, obeyed, and felt something shift inside themselves. For the first time, They realized fear did not have to mean obedience to cruelty. By midday, word of her presence spread. Men came, thinking they could challenge her, thinking her survival had been a fluke. They arrived in groups, armed with whips, clubs, and ropes, their faces set with determination. They had no idea what they were about to face. Dinah met them at the edge of a tobacco field. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply stood, tall and silent, her dark eyes fixed on each one of them. And then it began. Legs buckled, arms trembled, horses shied, carts toppled, tools slipped from hands. Panic rippled through the group faster than any shout could. Men ran blindly, striking one another in their confusion, the earth itself turning against them. None survived the encounter unshaken. By evening, the stories had spread like fire through Talbot County. Dinah was no longer just a woman. She was a force, a presence that could not be restrained, captured, or killed. People whispered of curses, divine wrath, ancient spirits. Children hid behind doors, daring one another to peek, daring one another to see the woman who had survived the gallows and walked freely among them. But Dinah's power was not about fear alone. She understood it, controlled it, wielded it carefully. She did not punish for pleasure. She did not harm unless necessary. Her goal was to reshape the world she had inherited, to claim justice where law had failed, to ensure survival for herself and those who had always suffered under cruelty. Thomas Hargrove, desperate and enraged, sought counsel from men he believed wise. They offered remedies, rituals, even bribes. None worked. Dinah had become untouchable. Even the sheriff, Porter, avoided her now, his hands trembling at the thought of enforcing laws that had no effect. By the third day, Dinah had moved beyond the estate into Easton. She passed through the streets quietly, yet her presence alone bent reality. Windows rattled as she went by. Animals grew restless. Even the air seemed to thicken in her presence. Townsfolk whispered, fearful and reverent. Merchants counted their gold nervously. Children told stories they could not fully explain, stories of shadows moving of their own accord, of a woman untouched by death, of a force no one could name. That night, Dinah returned to the riverbank. The chop tank shimmered in the moonlight. Shadows stretched long across the banks, moving as if alive. Dinah sensed them, acknowledged them, and let them follow. She was no longer alone. Forces older than the county, older than the state, now lingered at the edges of her life. They watched, waiting, testing, recognizing her as something not entirely human. By the fifth day, Dinah learned more of the dark history of Talbot County. Old stories reached her ears, stories of men and women punished, secrets buried, injustices left unresolved. She understood that the land remembered every cruelty, every death, every injustice, and that she alone had become the vessel through which the county itself could reckon with its past. She returned to the estate, standing at the edge of the main house. Thomas Hargrove tried once more to assert authority. He shouted, he waved his fists, he threatened punishment. Dinah did not move. The land trembled slightly, the air thickened. Thomas staggered, unsure if the tremor beneath his feet was real or imagined. He tried to strike her with a cane. His hands shook uncontrollably. The earth seemed to resist him. He fell to his knees, finally understanding that no man could impose his will on what Dinah now embodied. Over the next several days, Dinah's influence spread. Workers began to act with a confidence they had never known. Men who had once struck fear into them hesitated, faltered, retreated. Even those who were not at the estate or in town spoke of the strange, unexplainable events, wondering if they were witnessing divine justice or a curse beyond comprehension. Dinah never explained herself. She never justified her actions. She simply moved through the county, observing, guiding, and correcting. She was a presence that demanded respect, that bent fear and power alike to her will. She had survived death, outwitted authority, and reshaped the county in 6 days of quiet terror. By the 7th day, she disappeared again, leaving behind whispers, awe, and a county that would never be the same. Thomas Hargrove feared her, respected her, hated her, but most of all, he understood that the woman who had survived the gallows had become something beyond mortal reckoning. Talbot County had been forced to acknowledge a new order. Fear had shifted, power had shifted, survival had shifted. And Dinah, once a young girl picking tobacco under the shadow of cruelty, had become a force no one could deny. In Part 9, we will follow Dinah as the consequences of her power reach beyond the county, as outside forces attempt to challenge her, and as the dark, hidden history of Maryland threatens to surface in ways no one expected. Part 9. The shadows stretch beyond. Talbot County had changed. People whispered her name in fear, in awe, and in wonder. Dinah, the woman who had survived the gallows, walked freely, her presence bending the world around her. But power has a way of drawing attention, and not all who noticed were friendly. Forces beyond the county had heard the stories, strangers who believed the world could be controlled, and that any woman, no matter how untouchable, could be challenged. It began on a gray morning when a carriage rolled into Eastern. The horses were restless, snorting at the mist that clung low to the ground. The driver's hands shook, gripping the reins as if he felt the wind might rise against him. From the carriage emerged two men, tall and sharply dressed, strangers with eyes that assessed everything. They had traveled from Baltimore, men of means and influence, and they had heard the rumors, a black woman who had survived execution and bent a county to her will. Dinah had sensed their approach before they arrived. She stood at the edge of the river where she often went to listen to the land, the wind, and the shadows. She could feel their intent like a weight pressing against her chest. These men did not come seeking justice. They came seeking control, and that made them dangerous. As they approached, Dinah did not move. She did not speak. She simply waited, letting the tension grow until it was almost unbearable. The first man, a merchant named Caldwell, took a step forward, cane in hand, his eyes darting nervously. "You are Dinah," he said, his voice tight. "We have heard what you can do." Dinah's dark eyes met his. "And you?" she asked softly. "What are you?" The second man, older, with a face carved like stone, spoke next. "We deal in order. We do not tolerate chaos. You have survived what no one should survive. We aim to understand, or to correct." Dinah studied them both. Their confidence was false. Fear lurked behind every gesture, behind every breath. She had learned long ago to read people like open books. They were clever, yes, but she was cleverer. And she had already survived death itself. Without another word, she stepped forward. The air thickened around them. Horses shied violently, the carriage rocked as if caught in an unseen storm. Caldwell raised his cane to strike, but his hands trembled. The other man tried to shout orders, but his voice faltered. Dinah did not touch them. She did not strike. The land, the air, the shadows themselves acted for her. Both men fell to their knees, unable to stand, their arrogance crushed by a force they could not name. Word of the encounter spread quickly. Baltimore merchants, travelers, and landowners who had heard whispers now spoke openly of Dinah. Fear grew beyond Talbot County. Letters were sent, warnings were whispered in taverns and markets. A woman who could survive death, who could command the air, the land, the very will of men, walked freely in Maryland. Dinah did not seek fame. She did not seek revenge. But she understood the truth of her power. She was no longer just surviving. She was reshaping the world, calling out the cruelty and corruption that had long been hidden. Her attention became a reckoning, her presence a judgment. Yet not all forces welcomed her rise. In the days that followed, strangers continued to arrive, men and women drawn by curiosity, ambition, or fear. Some sought to destroy her. Others sought to bargain. All failed. Dinah moved through the county like a shadow that could not be caught, her eyes unblinking, her presence undeniable. One night, she returned to the Hargrove estate, drawn by whispers in the land itself. The fields were quiet, the cabins empty. She could feel the echoes of fear and obedience, the lingering presence of past cruelty. And she sensed it, something older than the county, older than the state, something that had been waiting for her arrival. The shadows stirred. Dinah had felt them before, but now they were bolder, moving more distinctly in the corners of her vision. They whispered, but not in words humans could understand. They beckoned, showing her the history buried beneath Talbot County, injustices unrecorded, crimes hidden in the soil, secrets that had shaped generations. She understood that she had survived not only because of her will, but because the land itself had chosen her as its vessel, its witness, its agent of reckoning. By dawn, she had a plan. Dinah moved to the town, walking silently through Easton. Farmers, merchants, and residents froze as she passed. She did not speak. She did not raise a hand. The power she wielded was in her presence alone. And with it came change. Contracts that had bound laborers were found shredded. Tools and livestock returned to the workers. Authority that had been cruel and absolute weakened wherever she walked. Thomas Hargrove, once master of his estate, now watched helplessly from the porch. His wealth, his influence, his violence, all meaningless against her presence. He tried to summon authority, to command obedience, to threaten her, but the words died in his throat. The land refused him. The workers no longer obeyed him. And Dinah, silent and calm, moved among them, a living reckoning. By the 5th day, the strangers from Baltimore returned, braver and more numerous, determined to confront her again. This time, they brought ropes, chains, and threats. But Dinah stood at the edge of the river, calm as ever, and once again, the land itself intervened. Horses reared, mud swallowed boots, ropes snapped. Men fell, struggling to rise as if the very ground denied them. Their ambition crumbled into fear, their confidence erased by a force beyond comprehension. Word of these events spread far and wide. Dinah's name became legend before her story had ended. People spoke of her in whispers, children told tales of shadows bending to her will, and the county understood that nothing, neither law nor wealth nor violence, could contain her. And yet, Dinah did not feel triumph. She understood that her survival was not an end. It was a beginning. The forces watching, the history buried, and the cruelty waiting to rise would not rest. She would need to continue, to confront, to endure. She had survived the gallows. Now she had to survive the world. In Part 10, the final chapter, we will uncover the ultimate fate of Dinah, the full reckoning of Talbot County, and the truth behind the power that had allowed her to defy death itself. The conclusion will reveal secrets that have been buried for centuries and answer the question everyone has asked. Why was she the one to survive when all odds said she should have died? Part 10. The Reckoning of Dinah. The sun rose over Talbot County on the morning that would mark the end of everything people thought they knew. The mist hung low over the fields, thick and unyielding, like the weight of history itself pressing down on the land. Dinah walked through it, her steps silent, her presence commanding. She had survived the gallows. She had outwitted men, law, and fear itself. Now, the final reckoning had come. The county had not forgotten. Every planter, every merchant, every man who had once wielded power with cruelty trembled as word spread that Dinah would appear in Eastern that day. Rumors had grown taller than trees. Some said she was touched by God. Others whispered she was something older, something beyond human understanding. Children hid, adults whispered, and even the sheriff avoided the streets. Dinah did not seek revenge. She did not seek mercy. She sought balance, justice, and truth. The land itself had chosen her as a vessel, a witness to the horrors and injustices that had festered for generations. She had learned the secrets the county buried, the hidden debts, the stolen labor, the cruelty that lingered even after slavery had been abolished. Now, it was time for the county to see what it had made. She arrived first at the courthouse square, the site of her failed execution. The gallows had been dismantled, but the memory remained. People gathered cautiously, standing far back, whispering to one another. Some brought children, curious and fearful. Others simply came to witness what they had heard in stories that had grown taller with every retelling. Dinah stood at the center of the square. The air shifted immediately. Horses whinnied, wagons tipped slightly, and even the river seemed to still in acknowledgement of her presence. She raised her hand, not threatening, not demanding, simply acknowledging that she was here. And the county understood. Thomas Hargrove stepped forward, face pale, hands shaking. He had believed that wealth, influence, or intimidation could control the woman who had survived the gallows. He had been wrong. Now, he faced the undeniable truth. Dinah was beyond his power. She was a force, shaped by suffering, survival, and the land itself. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying across the square, steady and calm, cutting through the whispers. Talbot County has long ignored its sins. The cruelty you practiced, the lives you destroyed, the voices you silenced, these cannot be undone. But you will see them, you will remember them, and you will understand that fear and respect cannot be commanded. They must be earned. The people froze. The words were not just spoken. They landed, heavy and final, shaping the air itself. Even the skeptics, the men and women who had dismissed the stories, felt a weight pressing against them, an undeniable reckoning they could neither escape nor deny. For hours, Dinah moved through the county. She walked through fields and farms, through markets and town streets. Wherever she went, the rules of power shifted. Men who had once beaten workers faltered. Tools dropped from hands. Contracts shredded themselves. Horses bucked at the edges of fields. Fear and respect, long confused, now realigned. Dinah did not strike. She did not punish. The world itself responded to her presence. By midday, the strangers who had traveled from Baltimore, seeking to control or challenge her, arrived once more. They were numerous, determined, and confident. But Dinah stood at the edge of the river, calm, her dark eyes unblinking. The land itself resisted them. Ropes broke, mud swallowed boots, and the air grew thick. Men and women fell, disoriented and defeated, unable to impose their will on what was beyond mortal reckoning. Even Thomas Hargrove, once a man of authority, understood that this was beyond him. He tried to assert control, to threaten, to command. The land trembled at his words. Tools fell from his hands. Horses reared. His wealth could not shield him. His family's legacy crumbled under the force of a woman who had survived death itself. As the day turned to evening, Dinah returned to the riverbank where she had first sensed the shadows that had watched her. They gathered now, more distinct, more purposeful. They whispered secrets of the land, of the past, and of a justice that transcended law. Dinah listened, understanding that her survival had been no accident. She had been chosen, not just to endure, but to reckon, to shape, to balance the world around her. When she finally turned to leave, Talbot County had been forever changed. The power structures that had ruled with cruelty were weakened. Fear had been redirected. Respect had been redefined. And Dinah, the woman who had stared death in the face and walked free, had become a force no man could touch, no law could bind, no rumor could diminish. As night fell, people whispered her name with reverence. Children told stories of a woman who had survived the gallows and walked freely, commanding the very land. Men who had once believed themselves invincible now knew the truth. Some forces are beyond human understanding, and Dinah was one of them. Dinah vanished that night, leaving behind awe, fear, and a county transformed. She became legend in Talbot County, a shadow that could not be caught, a truth that could not be denied, and a reminder that survival, courage, and the power to reckon can transcend even death itself. Talbot County would never forget her. And the world, for those who dared to whisper her name, knew that justice, when wielded by those chosen by fate and circumstance, can change everything. If you enjoyed Dinah's story and want to uncover more dark and unsettling truths from America's past, make sure to subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, share this story with others who crave history and mystery, and comment below to tell us where you're listening from and what part of this tale shook you the most. The story of Dinah is complete, but her legend will echo forever.